A 13-year-old girl would head to the store to buy cornflakes. Unfortunately, the last time anybody would see her alive was on that CCTV footage. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. Let's get started. Lindsay Jo Rimer was a 13-year-old girl from Hebden Bridge, West Yorkshire. She lived with her parents and 3 siblings. She had an older brother and sister, and a little sister. Lindsay had a paper route, and she'd save up all of her money and put it into her #1 passion, and that was fashion. Her mom would describe her as incredibly well-behaved, sensible, reliable, and simply incredibly happy. On November 7th, 1994, around 10 p.m., Lindsay left home and went to the shop to buy cornflakes. On her way to the shop, she briefly stopped by a local pub where her mother was having a drink with a friend. Basically, her mother asked if she wanted to stay and have a cola with them, but Lindsay said no and continued on to the shop. CCTV footage from the shop showed her paying for her cornflakes at 10:22 p.m., and that remains the last known sighting of Lindsay alive. Lindsay failed to return home that night, but her mother was out, and her father had been on the phone between 9:45 and 10:20 p.m., so neither noticed that she had not returned home that evening. When she did not turn up for her regular paper route the next morning, her parents quickly realized something was wrong. They ran to her bedroom and they realized she wasn't there. Police would quickly start extensive searches for the missing girl. At first, police believed that Lindsay ran away from home. The locals had been speculating that there were some problems at home, but her parents very much denied this. They said that she had no reason to run away from home, things were going really well for her, and that they really weren't having any problems. They said there was simply no reason for her to run away, and that something terrible must have happened to her that night. Lindsay's older sister, Katie, took part in a reconstruction video of her little sister's walk to the shop, and at this time, hundreds of people are volunteering and looking for this little girl. They're searching the route that she walked and any possible place around that area that they can find her. There was a canal on the route, and that was searched extensively, but nothing came of it. Unfortunately, her body would be found in that canal on April 12, 1995. Police quickly realized that something was wrong with this. The girl hadn't simply fallen into the canal and drowned. She had been weighted down by a concrete boulder. They believe that she had been dislodged during the dredging operations in that section of the canal when they were searching it. She was found fully dressed in the clothes she had been wearing when she disappeared. The police believe that the killer knew that this was a very busy factory, but that it had no security after dark, which made police believe that this was a local person or a person that had local knowledge. Police had searched parts of the canal, but said after the discovery of Lindsay's body that they had not searched that section where she had been found. Detectives admitted that it had been a mistake and that they should have searched upstream, in part because the flow of the water in the canal could have taken her body upstream towards where she was eventually found. Then detectives would later clarify that they believed she had been put into the section of the canal by the factory, and that 20-pound stone that had been used to weigh her body down, they soon realized that that came from next to the canal. The post-mortem exam determined that she had most likely been strangled. Her voice box had been flattened against the spinal column, and there were no signs of congestion across the middle of the neck muscles. There was also no signs of sexual assault. So the detective on the case concluded that this was not an attack that had been sexual in nature. Detectives believe that Lindsay was murdered on the night she went missing, or in the early morning before she was reported missing. They also believe that she was most likely killed by someone she knew. She was described as a very cautious girl, and they firmly believed that she would only get into a car if she knew and trusted somebody. The canal where her body was found ran close to the street where her family had lived. So police believe that Lindsay had walked home along that unlit path that runs a few yards from her house. The strange thing is, shortly before she was found, it was revealed by police that a roll of film featuring a Scottish castle had been found in Lindsay's room in her home, which was considered notable as she had never been to Scotland and none of the people featured in the photos were known. So detectives would issue an appeal for anyone who knew the individuals or knew of any reason why she would have these photos. Lindsay's mother said that perhaps they had something to do with a school exchange. And I feel like that means perhaps they were going to do a student exchange program, and that's why Lindsay could have had the pictures. But it is pretty strange. I would assume that if she was considering doing a program like that her parents would know. I mean, eventually they would have to know because they would have to give permission to do so. 2 months after Lindsay's body was found, police would release pictures from that CCTV footage of shoppers that were shopping in the same shop as Lindsay on the evening of her disappearance. Apparently, a number of shoppers have never been identified, although police have continually appealed for them to come forward. And it's not because they necessarily believe that they did anything wrong, but they could have seen something that night that could lead to, obviously, the identity of Lindsay's killer. Oftentimes, it's just the smallest thing that leads police to unraveling a case. A year after Lindsay disappeared, detectives theorized that perhaps Lindsay had met her killer a few days prior to when she actually was murdered. On November 5th, 1994, Lindsay had went to the Hebden Bridge bonfire, and police asked anybody with information from that night to come forward. Perhaps they seen her talking to somebody at the fire, perhaps she went somewhere with somebody. They just needed any information they had. In 2000, a forensic psychologist came forward and told police that the killing may have actually been sexual in nature, or at least had a sexual element to it. He claimed that maybe this person murdered Lindsay because she turned him down or rebuffed his sexual advances, and he said that she was most likely killed in pretty close proximity to where she was put in the water. Since the discovery of her body, police have taken hundreds of witness statements. They've spoken to more than 5,000 people during the investigation. They've searched 1,200 vehicles, and that was just in the first year of the investigation. They've also investigated a number of convicted murders and sex offenders who were still free at the time of the murder. I did a case on John Taylor, and they did suspect that he may have something to do with it, but there was never any evidence to link him to it. In April of 2016, the West Yorkshire Police said they did have a DNA profile, which was obtained by a Canadian team of forensic specialists. And because of this, they hope they're able to identify the killer. Lindsay's sister, Kate, would go on to say, "I was 20 at the time and still remember when Mom called me to say my little sister was missing. I felt instantly that something was wrong. And then 5 months later, she was found. From the beginning, we had been filled with grief, and we cannot stop the grief and instead remember her with love until this comes to an end. We miss her so much, but every memory of her is tainted. It is so painful and bleeds into everything we do. It is about time this came to an end. It is a life sentence for this family. Hopefully with this new DNA evidence, police are able to locate the killer." I'm not sure if this was somebody local, but it would seem that it is a crime of opportunity. Perhaps it was somebody walking that night and they saw Lindsay and they approached her. Maybe they did make sexual advancements at her and she very much turned them down, and this maybe put them in a rage. Or perhaps she was meeting somebody there that evening just to say hi. Maybe it was somebody she liked. Maybe it was somebody she had met at that bonfire, and she didn't realize that they had some pretty devious intentions. I'm very hopeful that now that they have a DNA profile, they're able to determine the killer. But we all know that this person has to already be in the system or commit a future crime, probably a felony, or at least it's a felony in the US. I'm not sure how England kind of handles crimes and how they take DNA, but it will be interesting to see how they are able to track down this killer. I did mention they spoke to 5,000 some odd people during this investigation. It would be interesting to know if they ever took DNA profiles from any people on this case. I would suspect that they probably didn't because perhaps they concluded they didn't have any DNA evidence at the time. Now that they have this DNA evidence, I'm curious if they're going to go back and ask certain people for DNA samples. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, pop it in the comments below, and I'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you then.